body. And I'm here. And I'm unmuted, right?
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Educator Evaluation and Support Council meeting. We will now get started. It is 9:32 and all of our participants are present and accounted for. I'm Dr. Shawana Tucker, Chief Talent Officer here at the State Department of Education, and I am very pleased to welcome you to the Educator Evaluation and Support Council. Your organization selected you for a reason, as you are the voice that represents your organizational interest as well as educators in our state. Here at the Department of Education, we realize that it is time for us to reassess our current educator evaluation and support plan. We know that improvements to the system are warranted, so we are excited about the opportunity afforded us right now to enhance and engage with you. We are excited about the potential of what we can accomplish together while working within the current law and regulations. Today is the first of many conversations that we will have. It is our intent that this process be transparent, collaborative, and inclusive of your input and feedback from your reflective organizations and educators across the state. We are relying on you. Your honesty and expertise are of value to creating a support and growth model for our educators. At this time, I would like to acknowledge a few colleagues that have joined us today. First, we have Deputy Commissioner Desi Nesmith. We welcome him and we thank him for his support. And next, I would like to introduce someone who truly needs no introduction, as we are all familiar with her work and tenure here at the Department of Education. In March of 2021, Charlene Russell Tucker was appointed to serve as our Acting Commissioner of Education. From that day forward, she has hit the ground running and daily addresses all the issues impacting education statewide. Previously, she served as the Deputy Commissioner with oversight of educational supports and wellness priorities. Professionally, she is passionate about equity and diversity and values the importance of family and community engagement in education and social, emotional, and mental health as the foundation for positive school and life outcomes. Commissioner Russell Tucker serves on various state and national committees and was recently the recipient of the 2021 National Public Service State and Local Excellence in Mentoring Award. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Commissioner Charlene Russell Tucker.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tucker. It's great to be with you all this morning and great to see everyone in this space. And most of you know, I always find, I hope you are well. That is so critically important. So it's a pleasure to welcome you all to the Educator Evaluation and Support Council. So we've all come to the table with diverse perspectives. It's that diversity of thought and ideas that will serve as a strength as we work hand in hand to reimagine our educator evaluation and support system. And yes, some of you have been here before. I took the opportunity last night to look through some of the previous notes from the Performance Evaluation Advisory Council PEAK. And I looked at the 2012, 2016, 2017, and I looked at the membership list, and no surprise, some of you were a part of that effort. So I guess I'm saying welcome back to you, and also for new folks who have added to the group. It is important to remember as we take on this task that the primary goal of having in place a substantive system of evaluation is to strengthen individual and collective practices that lead to, and I underscore, student success and excellence. And so while the department will help guide this work, I really also want to emphasize that it will be a holistic and collaborative process with our partners, that's all of you. And convening the council today, first of many meetings I'm sure we will have in many conversations, is part of the department's commitment to engage in you, our partners, and giving you the autonomy to weigh in, develop the strongest educator evaluation and support system for our state. We have much to look back on in our own learning here and what may be happening in other states around us. And so this is a safe space, and I know that none of you are shy, in which we can be open and honest to discuss our thoughts, and what we collectively know will support all of our educators. So that's why it's so important to us that we have an external facilitator helping to conduct this process, a facilitator who is a neutral party, who brings the necessary experience having done this in other states. So I'm confident that the meaningful contributions of this council will translate in what is best for Connecticut's educators and the best possible outcomes for our students. And I know together that is our collective why that we're gathered here today. So I want to thank Dr. Tucker again, our entire talent office staff, and each one of you for participating in this very important process. While I'll have to jump off for another meeting today, I look forward to our work together and know that you will have a very productive day. So thank you again, Dr. Tucker, for allowing me the space to say hello and to bring everyone together with the collective SDE welcome into the space. Thank you very much, and back to you.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. We appreciate your words this morning and your presence, and thank you for joining us. At this time, we would now like to have our council members introduce themselves. We would ask that you state your name, your title, your role, and your affiliation. And we'll start with AACTE Connecticut.
Hi, I'm Nancy Descharnette I'm the Director of the School of Education at the University of Bridgeport, and I'm representing AACTE Connecticut.
Welcome. CASA. Do we have anyone from CASA this morning? Okay, we'll move on to CAS.
CASA's here. I was just muted.
Okay.
Anthony DiTrio, I'm the chairperson of CASA.
Wonderful, welcome. And next
Thank you.
we'll have CAS, the Connecticut Association of Schools.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Bill Silva, Associate Executive Director, Connecticut Association of Schools.
Good morning and welcome. AFT.
Good morning, Jan Hockadell, President of AFT.
Good
And
morning, Jan.
we also have Mary Yorton with us.
Good morning to both you and Mary. Next, CEA.
Good morning. My name is Jeff Leake. I'm a teacher in Cheshire and currently president of the Connecticut Education Association. And joining us today is Kate Field, also from CEA.
All right, good morning, Kate and Jeff. CAPS.
Morning, everyone. I'm Terry Carroll. I'm a Director of Professional Development for the Connecticut Association of Public School Superintendents.
Morning. RESC Alliance.
Good morning, Chip Dume, Executive Director at Cooperative Educational Services, representing the RESC Alliance.
All right, good morning. CFSA.
Good morning. I was on mute too. I'm Laura Rodriguez. I'm the Secretary Treasurer of CFSA. And also we have Colleen Weiner with us today too.
All right, welcome. MTR Policy Oversight Council.
Good morning. My name is Rebecca Good. I founded Relay Connecticut and I'm representing the MTR Policy Oversight Council.
Morning. And last but not least, CABE.
Hi, Liz Brown. I'm the Vice President of CABE and also a member of the Waterbury Board of Education. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. All
One
right.
of my apologies. We also have Kate Erickson representing the RESC Alliance today.
All right, thank you very
And Dr.
much.
Tucker, we also have Leonard Lockhart representing CABE as well.
All right, thank you all. Did I miss anyone? All right, I think we've covered it. Thank you so much for those introductions. It is now my pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Paul Fleming, who serves as the Senior Vice President for Standards, States, and Equity at Learning Forward. His current area of focus includes the revision of the standards for professional learning and multiple consulting projects with states and districts to increase educator and leader effectiveness through equity-focused, high-quality professional learning. Prior to joining Learning Forward, he served as the Assistant Commissioner for the Teachers and Leaders Division at the Tennessee Department of Education and was responsible for the design, implementation, evaluation and support of impactful policies, practices, and programs related to teacher and leader preparation institutions, licensure, evaluation, and development and educator talent. Before joining the department in 2012, he was a social studies teacher at the middle and high school levels and principal at Hume Fogg Magnet High School in Nashville, Tennessee. I'm very pleased to welcome and introduce Dr. Paul Fleming.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tucker, and also to Commissioner Russell Tucker and all of you. It's just great to be part of this. And as mentioned, I will be serving as kind of the official facilitator for this process. I think it's important just to stay up front that I'm passionate about educators and leadership and all the feedback and coaching that goes with this process. And also for you to know that this is a way to have someone like myself serve in this role, to listen carefully and to reflect back and help move this process along so that all of you, it feels like an open and transparent and collaborative process. And I was fortunate, it was mentioned by Dr. Tucker, to lead some similar efforts, both in my current role now with several states and districts across the country, thinking around teacher and leader development and coaching and ongoing feedback processes, and then also as assistant commissioner in Tennessee, because I believe we started our evaluation process similarly around the same time as all of you in Connecticut as well. So just really excited to be here, and we'll share in a few moments just some of the best practices and learnings and research that have come out in the last few years to really support educators that I think all of us have that common goal. So excited to be here and looking forward to working with all of you as well. So I'm going to turn it over, I think at this point, to Chris to go through the agenda and share the next piece of the day. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fleming. We appreciate that. And before we move forward, we do have one other member that has joined us, and the logo was not on the slide, and that would be our State Board of Education member, Erin Benham. Erin.
Good morning, everybody. I'm glad to be part of this.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us, Erin, and sorry for missing you in the overall introduction because I did not see the logo there. So my apologies for that.
No problem, Shauna.
Muted yourself, Doctor.
All right. Thank you. As we move forward and we prepare to review our agenda for the day, it brings me pleasure to introduce the wonderful and awesome talent team that I have the pleasure of working with on a daily basis. And that would be Christopher Todd, who is the Bureau Chief here in the Talent Office, as well as Kimberly Audette and Sharon Fuller, our educational consultants in the Bureau of Educator Evaluation and Support, who many of you have worked with throughout the years. So I'm now going to turn it over to my colleague and friend, Chris Todd.
Thank you, Dr. Tucker. Good morning, everybody. So we're so excited to launch this work today. So as many of you know, this has been ongoing conversations over the last year. It's been something that both the commissioner and Dr. Tucker highlighted has been a long time coming in a lot of respects. And so we're really excited to begin this work. We recognize that we have a robust agenda planned for today. And unlike what we'll see more of in future meetings, today, sadly, will be a little bit more kind of CSDE learning forward directed conversations to start off the meeting. We're hoping that as we move through this work, what you'll see towards the end of the meeting today, which is going to be more open conversation, dialogue, and discussion, is going to become the format as we move forward. But really our goal today is to help level set a little bit around a brief background of where we've come from. So what was kind of the origin of PEAK, what were the focus of PEAK. For some of you, you were intimately involved in that process. For others, you're aware of it or were impacted by it, but maybe weren't as directly involved in the work. And then our goal really today is, as we get to part 4 of the agenda, is to really be able to begin those initial conversations of looking at what recommendations this council would like to make to the state board regarding flexibilities for the upcoming 2021-22 academic year. Paul, if you want to move to the next slide. Thank you. So as we launch our work today, we just wanted to level set around a couple key housekeeping protocols. We recognize that we have been a year into virtual meetings. And so for many of us, this has become more of a familiarity. And we also want to recognize that each of you are taking time out of your incredibly busy schedules to be with us today. And our promise to you is that we will make all of our time together meaningful, focused, and most importantly, always collaborative. We acknowledge that while our meetings are taking place in a public setting, they are not in fact public meetings. And so as such, all the meetings, the chat box comments, any notes that are taken by our team will be made publicly available and recorded for the public. So they will be shared with each of you following each of our meetings, and they will also be posted to the CSDE website that will be specific to EES 2022 with all materials, all recordings, all slide decks publicly available for everybody to see. We believe that transparency in this process has to be one of our fundamental principles in order for this to be accepted across the field. And so we're going to do every effort as we can, working in kind of this virtual environment to make that available and open to the field. Paul, if you want to go to the next. So Dr. Tucker and I, as many of you have lived this work, we've been evaluated under the current system. We've supported the evaluation of educators under the current system. And both of us have been intimately involved in the work of PDEX. As Dr. Tucker pointed out, additionally, Ms. Fuller and Dr. Ardette from the talent office team have worked for numerous years supporting districts with their implementation of the educator evaluation and support system and helping them find ways to be creative and accomplish what their local pursuits were within the given context of the guidelines. And I think we all on this call recognize that somewhere along the way, for many educators across the state, the underlying principle that the primary focus and the primary purpose of evaluator systems was to provide feedback and growth and support got lost along the way. And as Dr. Tucker stated in her opening remarks, we are excited to use this opportunity today to really begin the first of several meetings to address those concerns, to identify what is working, where our system requires changes, and how to better align with our vision of continuous learning and growth. If you want to advance, Paul. Guiding our work will be the same guiding principles that currently exist for educator evaluation and are highlighted within our existing 2017 Connecticut Guidelines for Educator Evaluation. Strengthening educator practice, standard-based systems, ongoing collaborative dialogue, and strong connections to professional learning are going to remain critical underpinnings of our work as we carry this forward. You want to move forward more? And so as we dive into the work of this council and a little bit about kind of the concept behind rebranding this council, we recognize that your organizations and some of you were directly involved in the Performance Evaluation Advisory Council, otherwise known as PEAK, but that many of you are new to this role. PEAK was guided by General Statute 10-151. And at the onset of our work, I think it's important to acknowledge that PEAK did accomplish the original intent of the law, which was to develop, validate, and implement an educator evaluation system across the state. We recognize that PEAK was the appropriate vehicle through which this work was done. It allowed for conversations, it allowed for recommendations to the state board, and that the decisions regarding educator evaluation and support ultimately should not be made in a vacuum. And so as such, EES 2022 offers us a new opportunity to rebrand and look at educator evaluation and support in a way, in a lens that we want it to be transcribed across the state, but also serve as a platform to make sure that all of our stakeholders' voices and inputs are heard and influence the process in regards to the recommendations made by the state board. This is our opportunity to work through these items, to revisit some of the work that had been done before and the discussions before, and to refine, amend, and change this process And so while we look to maintain a similar process that existed prior, we want to rebrand this work and shift it moving forward so that the outcome ends up being a system that educators across the state feel is supportive, feel does open the door for more collaborative conversations, and ultimately in the end helps improve practice to improve student success. As collective members of the EES 2022, we will each have defined roles in this process. Each voting organization here today is represented by 2 individuals, a delegate and an alternate. As previously communicated, the delegate will serve as the voting member of each organization, making recommendations on behalf of your stakeholders. Alternates attend and will fully participate in all of our discussions and conversations, but will serve as a non-voting member unless in the absence of their assigned delegate. So sadly, you are all stuck with me, a former politics and government teacher and social studies teacher. So I like protocols, I like process, but I think at the end of the day, it will help support kind of a collaborative conversation. I think in both these instances, whether you're a delegate, whether you're an alternate, you serve an incredibly critical role in this process, because we are going to rely heavily on you, and the council is going to rely heavily on you to work collaboratively, to go back to your respective organizations, to gather input, to gather feedback, and then bring that back to the council so that we can evaluate, weigh, and really use that to help guide our decision-making process. I want it to be clear, and similar to the commissioner's remarks earlier this morning, that members of the CSDE and members of the State Board of Education on this council are not in fact voting members of this council. Our role really is to help with the organization, the facilitation, the partner engagement, and then ultimately working with you to make a recommendation to the state board for changes to the educator evaluation system. I think from the onset, we have tried to communicate, and we want to communicate that we as the talent office, as the State Department of Education, are not entering this work with a prescriptive outcome. We are very much looking for you to help us build where we want to go with this work, in the hopes that it does address the concerns and moves us in a direction that we want to move in. As previously mentioned by Paul, Learning Forward, specifically Dr. Fleming, will serve as a third-party facilitator. As a partner in this work, Learning Forward will help provide the council with relevant and timely research, best practices, and models from across the nation to help inform our own decision-making. Again, this is Connecticut's educator evaluation system. We have the capacity and we have the power to make decisions and to make recommendations to the state board that are best for Connecticut's context and for Connecticut's educators. As such, we're going to ask each council member to observe the following norms to help us facilitate open and honest dialogue, to support, capture, and codify input and ideas from multiple perspectives, and to position ourselves as learners and collaborators. We know that one of the unique challenges of educator evaluation and support in Connecticut is that its implementation looks and feels different across our districts. And I think everybody on this call knows that, recognizes it, and has experienced that. And while each of us has lived experiences and perspectives that are going to be critical to this work, we want to remind ourselves that our experiences are not universal truths. And how educator evaluation and support looks in one school and in one district is not necessarily consistent across the state as a whole. And it's our collective role to come together to figure out how do we make it more consistent and make it more meaningful and aligned with the vision and the purpose as it was intended. Next slide. So today represents the beginning of the first of 3 phases of our work together to reimagine educator evaluation and support in Connecticut. This document was shared with you. We recognize that it's really small on the screen. And we also want to recognize that this document was shared with you in a draft form. This is our plan as of today, as of April 9th, 2020. Or 2021, excuse me. We recognize that this can shift, it can change. We can ultimately have to tweak it, but our goal is to really stick through this idea of a 3-phase approach to reimagining educator evaluation. Phase 1 represents the adoption of flexibility measures for next year. And I think that that is going to be the critical piece of our work today and at our second meeting moving forward. Phase 2, which will begin this spring immediately following phase 1, represents the larger conversations and discussions about the work of the council and what recommendations we want to make collectively to the State Board of Education regarding our existing guidelines. Phase 3 will address any council recommendations for changes to the current statutory language that would allow for greater flexibility to the guidelines currently not permissible under the law as it's written. Throughout each stage, expanding stakeholder input and feedback from the field will become a critical piece of our work together and will be done through mechanisms and protocols designed in collaboration with this council. As a practicing educator the first time around, I recognize that many in the field felt as though they didn't have a mechanism for input into PEAK's process. I think we can all acknowledge that this is a very small collective group of amazing educators and professionals, but ultimately that we don't have the full input of the field. And I think that one of the most critical pieces of our work together is to collaboratively determine what our mechanisms for feedback are going to be, to make sure that all educators, administrators, classroom educators, support specialists, central office and board members, that they all feel as though they have the opportunity to weigh in this process and to indicate to us what they believe is working and what is not working and what needs to be refined. I think one of the powerful benefits of looking at this as a process in multiple phases is that by regulating our work across the phases, it will allow for actionable recommendations to be implemented in a timely manner. It will allow districts, in particular PDEC committees, to adjust accordingly, and it will allow for substantial revisions to the guidelines within the current law. It will allow us to provide timely and meaningful recommendations for next school year. It will allow us to then really address the larger picture within the guidelines for recommendations for the 2022-23 school year. And then ultimately, it will allow us as a council to make recommendations for potential changes to legislation and the law. But ultimately, it allows us to impact change now in incremental stages versus waiting till the end and hoping that we are able to get legislation passed through. So I think we want to be cognizant of what our goals and what our outcomes are going to be for each phase. Our primary objective during phase 1 will be make a timely recommendation to the State Board of Education to adopt flexibility measures for the 21-22 academic year. As you know, with the end of the governor's emergency declarations on May 20th, the flexibility measures approved for use during this current school year cannot simply transfer over to the 21-22 academic year. As such, EES 2022 Council must make recommendations to the State Board for adoption of flexibility measures to the guidelines for the upcoming school year. This will be the primary focus of today's conversation and our forthcoming meeting. At this time, it is my pleasure to turn our presentation over to Dr. Paul Fleming of Learning Forward.
Well, thank you so much, Chris. And again, it's such a pleasure to be here with all of you. And just want to reiterate a couple of things as we get started, sharing a few pieces of research and best practices that have really developed over the last 3 to 5 years. In fact, in other words, since the Connecticut evaluation model was put in place, and also like in Tennessee. But one, for Learning Forward, we're proud that we have a strong affiliate in Connecticut. We have many state affiliates, and Connecticut is one that plays a very active role for Learning Forward. We are in the process of revising the International Professional Learning Standards, of which feedback and coaching is a critical role and a critical part. But I think more importantly, or equally important, is what Chris mentioned and the team has already mentioned, that even as an organization, we work closely with districts and states to make sure we are supporting and developing the models that are in place, not to impose anything from Learning Forward. And that's similar to the role that I'll play here, is to have a strong and invested interest in supporting the Connecticut evaluation model and all of you in this effort. And it's not, in other words, then a national model, it's not a Learning Forward model, but very much focused on what's best for educators in Connecticut. And I was thinking about it too, when just a quick aside with Tennessee. So we started in 2011-12, and that was with Race to the Top, as Connecticut knows well too, going back when your model began, I believe about a year later. And I was actually a principal during that first year of evaluation. And there were a lot of pieces that were put in place very quickly. And there was a lot of emphasis on structure and not about in process and not about the actual thinking of what truly educators and leaders need around ongoing robust feedback and coaching and support. So at the end of year one, guess what? We had about 25% believe that the evaluation system was effective, right, across the state, surveying all educators. So those were some sobering lessons. And then when I joined the state in that following year, we were determined based on that data to bring more people to the table, to bring folks like yourselves representing all the organizations so that flexibilities and adjustments could be made to move the model from one that was perceived as often compliance-based and check the box and focused heavily on process to something that was much more collaborative and supportive so that every educator could grow. And you saw in the vision, I think that's a powerful statement for the work that's happening here in Connecticut. So I just wanted to offer that as context because I think there's an opportunity, and all of you have such a strong interest in this work and expertise to reiterate that this has to be a collaborative process, and all of you have that expertise to share and to make this model continue to move, as Chris and Dr. Tucker mentioned, and the team, to a more collaborative, supportive process for all. So I wanted just to quickly share just, again, some of those best practices and research that have been emerging. And I wanted to start with this quote because it strikes me as pretty powerful about, every student deserves a great teacher, not by chance, but by design. And I know as a high school principal, I believe this strongly, but I also knew, and I learned over time, that this needed intentionality on my part, and it needed a systems approach so that everybody was rowing in this direction, right? So that ongoing support and development and coaching were baked into the school, into my school, and it was baked into my leadership practices. So it became part of the DNA to think about how does this happen for every student? Because as we all know, at the end of the day, every student deserves this, and all of us want this, right? But this requires the collective effort in order to get there and thinking about it. So, that gets us to another quote you've probably seen before, but, often every system is perfectly designed to get the results it does. And I think we've seen historically in American education this to be true. It was designed very well for the results that we often received. But we also know now there's a shift in thinking around it, especially around an equity lens. If we need to reach every student and ensure every student's success, that requires some changes to the system that you heard Dr. Tucker and Chris outline, thinking deeply about what does it require on all of this council's part to see and be honest with what the system is producing, both the positive and the elements, especially around flexibilities that should continue, and also what are the areas that could be refined and developed to make the evaluation model even more collaborative and supportive, right, and transparent. And so that requires, this idea of engaging, which is where all of you are right now, and where we hope this council will go, with that deep engagement and requirement to act, right, and to think about that. Thinking about, I think it's all kind of common sense, right? When we think about, we want every educator to experience continuous learning and feedback. But as I mentioned, if it's not baked into the DNA of a system in a school, in a district, or at the state, meaning that policies and practices are not aligned, there often can be a disconnect between what the intentionality is of a model, like specifically an evaluation model, and the results that it's getting, and the perceptions, right, from educators about the system and what it's producing. And so there's some pretty compelling research, just briefly want to share, that highlights the incredible impact that when educators receive continuous learning and feedback and targeted kind of actionable and sustainable feedback over time in a supportive environment, the growth for students is pretty significant, right? So the first one I want to share, you may have seen this recently with the new report came out from Vanderbilt and the Wallace Foundation about how principals affect students in schools. And interesting to see that you see, especially these 4 leadership behaviors that are on the top half, that principals who consistently engage in these behaviors are actually quantifiably seeing 3 months of student growth and gains in math and ELA. And this is the first time this has been able to be quantified, that effective principals, when engaged in these kind of 4 buckets, are significantly moving the needle and helping students. And what's not on here is actually helping them with non-academic outcomes too, like increased attendance rate, lower incidences of exclusionary disciplinary policies and practices happening as well. And so it's a pretty powerful piece, especially if you look at, as I mentioned, honing in on these kind of 4 leadership behaviors. Now to take this one step further, there's something pretty profound in the study around the bucket that you see circled. And this is around engaging principals who engage instructionally and have instructionally focused conversations with teachers and provide feedback and support. And the finding is this, that pretty specifically, the findings show that principals who engage in walkthroughs in their classrooms, and if that's all they're doing, it does not change practice. So in other words, the thinking is often it's conventional wisdom and understandable to think the more principals are in classrooms and the more almost informal or infrequent or informal observations they're doing, the better. But if that is a standalone practice, it's been found not to change practice. Now to clarify, when it does change educator practice is when it's coupled with ongoing coaching and support. So when educators are receiving kind of sustainable feedback from their principals, from their instructional coaches, both within and outside the evaluation model, they're seeing significant changes in educator practice. So again, if that makes sense, it's the idea of just increasing perhaps the frequency of principals' time in classrooms does not necessarily change practice, but when it's coupled with a systems approach for ongoing coaching and feedback, it makes a much stronger case for in helping educators and helping support educator practice. So this is something that just came out last month, and I think we will make sure you have this resource as well for both. There's a PowerPoint that really captures a lot of these findings of the 138-page report, but we can also send the full report if you're interested as well. Also urging, if you feel free to put questions or thoughts or comments as we're going through all of today in the chat box as you're thinking both about pieces that come to your mind, especially with this piece, but specifically throughout the time together. I wanted to share this piece too, because this is interesting that there's often been a myth that educator performance after the first 5 years in the classroom flatlines, and that there's often no more growth to be had with teachers after 5 years. In reality, we know this is not true. And we know though that school culture and school environments are different. And school cultures that provide ongoing coaching and feedback in a supportive, structured way actually support teacher growth over the length of their career. And they actually are in what we call this a stronger professional environment, that their students, especially in math, are making greater gains than teachers who are in less supportive environments and less supportive cultures in their schools. Again, kind of common sense, but powerful to think about what that means for not just the role of the principal, but the role of ongoing support for every educator, because you will see, again, this significant difference in educators that over time are given opportunities to grow. And that's where the alignment with an evaluation model can happen, right? The other interesting piece related to this is how it connects with, as many of you know, that the #1 factor for teachers staying in a school is the perception of their leader, their principal. Teacher pay is very important, not #1. Working conditions are very important, not #1. It's actually the perception of the principal and how well they support teachers in the classroom, right? Which would go along with schools that have a strong environment are marked by leaders who support a collaborative leadership culture and allow for the growth and support of educators over time, like you see here. So just a pretty interesting piece. Just one other piece around beginning teachers. And again, this sounds pretty common sense, but I think pretty powerful to think about. Teacher retention is greater and teacher improvement is greater in the first 3 years when they experience these pieces, right? They're working in more of those supportive school culture environments with strong school leadership. They have an opportunity to collaborate. It's still kind of stunning that over half of all teachers have never seen a colleague teach. This is no fault of the teachers, but this is how schools often are set up, where there are not opportunities, right, for that collaboration to occur and for teachers to grow and work together in a collaborative setting, right? And so that collaborative culture has a huge impact on teacher retention. And that's something that can be baked into, and it sounds like perhaps there's a flexibility or part of the Connecticut model may already be there, right? And they also, the retainment and the growth has been shown, especially given the previous slide from that study from Kraft and Pepe, that they do well when they participate in a rigorous teacher evaluation system. And by rigorous, that means accurate scoring. That means, as you'll see in a later slide, that there's the perception of the educator about the credibility of their evaluator has to be there. And thinking about the credibility of the evaluator and how important that is. And also that there's an opportunity again for this kind of ongoing feedback. So it's not a checklist mentality. It's not a gotcha mentality, right? That plays into that role. So that piece is there. It's important. So I think just to sum up, I think really what's been apparent in the last, decade, but specifically even in the last 5 years, are these elements, right? That seen across the country right now, that evaluation is getting more of a hold and more of a positive perception and results when teachers and administrators actually receive accurate information about performance, and that there is kind of a healthy differentiation of scores and of those ratings that occur both formatively and as a summative rating. I think the second one is huge because how difficult this is often to accomplish, right? Thinking about receiving regular, strong, and actionable feedback tied to the model and how that actually helps grow and the relevance when that happens. But also the challenges of putting that into a systems approach. As we know, there are often barriers, especially around time, for evaluators and for educators to engage and receive this meaningful feedback, right? And then finally, this piece of, as I mentioned, the perception of educators in the belief that their evaluators are competent, and the perception that the system is now rather about support and not just about accountability. So kind of marrying those twin pillars of support and accountability are important. And I guess the end of that Tennessee story was over time, after surveying teachers every year, it actually peaked at about 70% of educators a couple years ago. I remember it started at 28% in 2012, thought the evaluation model was effective and met their needs and helped them grow. It actually went up to about 70%. And that was a direct effort based on what you see on the screen here of trying to make changes based on educator feedback as well. And I think that's a piece or a message that I think is what you're hearing from the team and what the council hopes to do in thinking about getting all of your feedback and thinking of how to move a model and make some of these improvements as well. So I know these were just some highlights, but wanted to give you, what's been out there, especially in the last 3 to 5 years, and thinking related specifically to models of evaluation that are there. And at this point, I'm going to turn it back over, and it's going to be a little bit of an overview now of the recommendations of flexibilities here. And I believe for Kimberly, now I'll turn it over to you. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Paul. Hello, everybody. It's good to see you all. As we transition to the next part in the agenda, we really wanted to highlight this particular chart. It's an abbreviated chart of, it was a detailed attachment that you received in the email from Wednesday. And so that attachment, we took statute 10-151B subsection C, and we broke it down by phase. And aligned it to the language in the guidelines, both the teacher and the administrator. Then what we did, we created an additional row to help guide what this council will be able to change and recommend to the State Board of Ed versus having to make statutory changes first. That document will be used throughout our work, throughout the 3 phases that Chris spoke about. So please use that as a reference document. But for the purposes of today, as the council begins to consider flexibilities for 21-22, we want you to think about what the easiest pathway would be to continue moving forward for districts, considering that the flexibilities were offered this year, so 2021, what evaluation will be in 21-22, and then thinking, that long term with the full implementation of the reimagined guidelines in that following year, so 22-23. So we created this abbreviated chart with some of the more frequent inquiries that Sharon and I get. Districts will call us asking us questions about what they're able to amend in their evaluation documents. And, sometimes they have the flexibility, they have those options to make those changes, and other areas they're really tied to what the guidelines say. So we have highlighted with the 2 arrows some of the areas that we think could provide the most flexibility for educators and reduce anxiety. So the number of formal and informal observations, that observation protocol, that's very specific in the guidelines. But as you look at the flexibilities for this year, there's a lot more options that districts have within that protocol. The other part that we've highlighted with the arrow is the use of multiple indicators of student academic growth and development. So what the guidelines have said is it's really focused on those academic learning indicators. The flexibilities this current school year really expanded that option to include social and emotional learning. So these are some things that we want you to consider as we move forward into our next part of the agenda in the activity about what is working in the flexibilities and where as a council you have the most area for impact to provide and reduce anxiety for educators while continuing to move the work forward to that end phase, that end goal of the reimagined guidelines in 22. So with that, I will turn it back over to Paul to move on to our discussion topics.
Well, thank you, Kimberly. And as you mentioned, we really want to have an opportunity now to hear from everybody and to have a discussion based on some of these guiding questions, as Kimberly mentioned. So first, thinking about, what current flexibilities have been effective, both that you know about or that you've experienced or that you are working with and hearing from your colleagues and from your stakeholders that you believe should continue. Second, what have you been hearing and experiencing this year that have been perhaps less effective or even ineffective, and there should be maybe a stop or not continuing for 21-22. And then finally, is a thought about these what current flexibilities need to be revised or what should be maybe perhaps considered for next year for a new flexibility that doesn't currently exist, right, with all of that. So we would want to open it up, and this is, both if you have a thought in the chat to put that there. I may take the liberty maybe to volunteer Colleen as principal. If it's okay, we could start with you just to hear, since you're at the principal level, Colleen, to be thinking about, especially maybe in this first question of this year, how's that been for you in terms of the flexibilities and what that's meant for your faculty and for yourself as a leader of the school. So I apologize for putting you in the volunteer process, but I thought you would be a great perspective to start with. That's okay.
Well, I'm not the only principal. I should have changed my title,
Yeah.
but I appreciate it. I think they've been very effective this year, but it's just such a odd circumstance that we're living through that it's kind of hard to change teachers' mindsets sometimes, even when you're saying, listen, we're going to focus on more SEL, obviously this year. There's still this, like you were saying before, Paul, a lot of things are kind of baked into our routines, and So definitely was appreciated that we have the flexibilities, and you know, they want to, you know, we're encouraging them to continue their SEL practices from now on. So hopefully some of those things will occur after, you know, we're back to being fully reopened.
Mhm. Yeah, well, thank you for starting. And just as a quick follow-up, so do you believe that SEL flexibility, or is that should be continue, or is there any room also to make any revisions based on what you're hearing and seeing with your faculty as well?
I believe it should be continued. I mean, we can't get to rigor without relationships. And so if some of the SEL practices could be a little bit more supported through the, this process, I think it would greatly help, especially at the high school level. I think sometimes teachers tend to shy away from some of the SEL, but because of the pandemic, they realize it's critical work. So continuing those practices in the future, I think would be best practice.
Again, well, thank you for kicking this off, and love to hear from others and thinking about, you know, this school year, and probably like a school year like no other, and hopefully maybe like no other, what has been effective or working, and thinking about the current flexibilities for now.
I think what we've seen in our schools is that one of the barriers to the older eval situation was just logistically scheduling and making sure you had your 50-minute block, and that you had the planning papers, and you had another schedule for a post conference. And it's a lot of scheduling just for one person. And then when you have a school of 500, it becomes a logistical nightmare. What the informals have allowed for is just really, spontaneous, good conversations about what's happening right there, and really clear feedback right in that moment, without the paperwork that people really weren't, feeling that it was helping. The paperwork wasn't helping them grow as educators, at least from the perspective that I've seen. So that taking that logistical mountain out of the picture and just saying, get in the classroom, that's easier than saying, oh, did you have a pre-post? Did you have, did you make sure that you saw for 50 minutes the entire lesson? Some of those things, they just didn't seem as important this year.
No, thank you, Kate. And just to follow up on that, when you're saying the paperwork we're seeing as burdensome, was that related both to the time element, or was it related to even the process and the content related to the paperwork? Or I guess was it a little bit of both? You're thinking.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it starts to be a game of like just fulfill the expectation, and not really a true reflection of like, okay, how do I plan a really excellent lesson? Or it just turns into, that's the 1 or 2 times a year that I'm gonna, have every minute outlined and planned. That's not real. That's not real. That's not what happens every day in an educator's life. So I don't feel like it fits the routines. And let me just say, it's actually really nice when you need to support a teacher to go back to that planning model and saying, all right, let's get back and really look at how you're thinking about that. But we have a lot of excellent teachers that they don't map out every second of their day, and they have excellent lessons. So I don't know if I'm being too critical, but that's been my experience. My greatest teachers are not my greatest planners. So.
And are you finding then that, to summarize, does that mean then that the informal and the flexibilities perhaps around informal gives greater opportunities for even some of the teachers you just mentioned to engage with them?
And we're just having targeted conversations about what we just saw in that moment, about a literacy lesson, about a math lesson. And we're not getting bogged down of, oh my gosh, it's 4 days after that lesson. How did, we haven't talked about it yet because we were there. It wasn't, we actually can be more timely in our feedback as well. So that's been targeted as well.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And
Paul, could I interject quickly? Hi, everybody. I'm Kate. I'm with CEA. I would just like to share a perspective, and I want to reiterate something that Chris had said right at the beginning, which was, I thought, really profound. I wrote it down, which is our own experiences are not necessarily universal truths. And one of the things that I'm seeing in my role, I specialize in teacher evaluation at CEA. I'm also a former evaluator, and I was a teacher for 18 years. So one of the things I'm seeing in my role is just how diverse the practices are across the state. And, you know, some places the flexibilities are working brilliantly. And I would say, gosh, they should continue. And in other places, it's been an unmitigated disaster. So I personally have some reservations, and I know this group is really creative and has vast experience, and I know we're going to find a constructive way around them. But next year, primary concern I have with continuing the flexibilities is we all know teachers and administrators are completely stressed. And I want to reiterate what Kate just said regarding the burdensome levels of paperwork. When teachers and administrators return in the fall, we don't have any concept of the magnitude of what they're going to be facing. Kids are a mess emotionally. On top of that, they're going to be all over the place academically. And the fact that we're going to rate teachers on how well they perform in this totally unprecedented situation is really problematic. And I know statutorily it's very clear that's beyond our purview, but I urge this committee, not just for the benefit of teachers and administrators, but also the kids. I read, we were getting all this feedback at CA, and I saw this quote from a student who says, "Our parents and our teachers aren't fooling us. We know they're having a breakdown. Like, it's clear to us they're totally stressed out." And how do kids learn in that environment? We've got to take care of everybody. So in continuing the flexibilities next year, one of the things that won't be carried over is the lack of a rating. And we've got to figure a way around that. Whether it's adjusting the ratings significantly so that that rating is not going to be completely unreasonable based on, again, kids are all over the place for no fault of the teachers. How are we going to prepare them for that? How are we going to support them through that next year? So I really beg everybody on the committee to just keep that in mind, and in talking about how we're going to extend the flexibilities, because I'm all for an SEL focus, but I'm not for rating a teacher based on what they're utterly unprepared and could not possibly be prepared to do. Thank you.
No, okay, thank you. And that's, again, I think that's the point of today and really the council, right, going forward, is exactly what all of you so far are sharing, because I think you said a couple really powerful things. One, just how every district or context can be different. As you noted, perhaps there are areas that are knocking out of the park this year and are doing well with the flexibilities, and then some where you said it's really been a challenge or difficult, as well as this idea of a meaningful rating, right? And what does a meaningful rating system look like? Which I think is a really important question. Just like we talk about meaningful accountability, I think what you're raising is it possible to think about for next year with post-COVID and kind of building back better, so to speak, what does that look like for a rating system, right? That takes into account. Just curious too, Kate, did you see in either districts you mentioned, just what might, especially I think for districts that have kind of done well with the flexibilities, what was allowing them to do that, or what was your perception of some of that?
Well, you know, a lot of it is just that even SEED, or even our current, pre-flexibilities,
right,
evaluation was working in some places very well. And as you pointed out with your research, a lot of it has to do with a principal and the credibility or the reliability of those ratings. A lot of it has to do with how much feedback and the quality of the feedback and the frequency of the feedback. A lot of it just has to do too with the creative approach and where the PDEC is working in Connecticut. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. Where the PDECs are strong and where there's true attempt to come to consensus on those. If you've got the best ideas coming together, and that's where it's working. But it is so rule-based and it is so cumbersome. You talked about the importance of a rigorous evaluation system for beginning teachers. And I think in a lot of places they confuse rigor with burden. It's a lot of loopholes. And as a former evaluator, it's just as burdensome on them. And teachers sometimes feel like we're filling out all these forms, we're checking off all these boxes. It's taking time away from the students. So like Kate was saying, some teachers are brilliant. They don't necessarily have this perfect lesson plan. Are we going to take them away from their kids to write it just so we can check the box? And teachers and administrators tend to be really compliant people. We step up, we do what's asked of us. And, the really diligent teachers and the really diligent administrators want to check all those boxes and do it with actual fidelity. And it becomes, it just bogs everybody down.
Yeah. So
and it adds to stress, and it adds to everybody's feeling the time crunch. And time is finite. And if we're spending all our time on meaningless tasks, where does the conversation come in? Where does the feedback and the meaningful back and forth about what teaching should look like? Where is that?
Yeah, thank you. So is it fair to say that you're still perceiving there's a quantity aspect around the burden of even this year with the flexibilities in place, right? That there needs to be
depending on where, depending on what district we're talking about. Yes.
Yeah. So I'm thinking about next year, the eye towards how does this council, as you said, grapple with, not just meaningful rating, but also this idea of quality versus quantity, right? Related to.
Right. And the same is true with data. As an evaluator, I would have these awesome teachers come in and they'd have just huge amounts of data. Yeah. And I'd think like, oh my gosh, I have I'm evaluating 26 people. I have pre-conferences, I have post-conferences. I've got to go through all of this data, and you're drowning in data, but what is it even showing? Like, what are we doing with the data? And I'm not saying data is not important. Of course it is. It's the foundation of everything. But I think sometimes we lose sight of the tree for the forest. More data is not necessarily better.
Yeah, thank you. So that's, and then like you said, sounds like you're seeing that or have seen that. And that's maybe getting to that third question about what continues to need to either be revised or new brought to the flexibility table, so to speak, right? Around that notion of evaluator burden and also educator burden. Thinking about it. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, other folks, what is the spark for you or thinking as you're hearing? Yeah, Mary, go ahead.
Thank you. I'd like to follow up on both Kate's really great comments there. When I have also been surveying the AFT councils, the leaders of various AFT districts in the state, and also struck by that range of experiences. And one of the elements absolutely is that they are not being rated on SEL, that there's a willingness to try to implement steps, try to track some data, but to be held accountable for the outcomes in such an unpredictable time is really challenging. Moving on to next year, I really do support Kate's observation very strongly. To be required to predict outcomes next fall in an SEL world, which is pretty new strategies, pretty new practices in some ways, in terms of data particularly, it is going to be crushing. It is going to be very, very stressful. On the other hand, when I see what districts are implementing with great success, where teachers feel supported, it's when there is really meaningful mutual agreement. So that setting the goals at the beginning of the school year between an evaluator and and a teacher, it means that they're really having a conversation about the focus, the main practices and the main outcomes in that classroom and how to achieve them, as opposed to being required to have a SMART goal based on data that we've never used before or don't really quite understand at the beginning of the school year. I think mutual agreement is at the heart of what is in our documents, but not in our practices in many districts. And so to have a non-tenured teacher be told by an evaluator, you are going to use this formula for these sets of students with these 3 bands based on this data. And sometimes it's not related to the main subject. I think that needs to be looked at very carefully. And for SEL, the SEL goals or parent engagement practices, where it has worked is where the language of the flexibility document, it says for student learning indicators, you can use measures of accomplishment. So some districts, people have been very comfortable using SMART goals and data-driven goals and student outcomes very traditionally identified. Other districts, for SEL particularly, are identifying measures of accomplishment. We will engage in these classroom practices and we will engage in this type of professional learning and see a measure of accomplishment at the end. It may not be based on a traditional SMART goal of data assessment. We don't really have experience. We are not confident in the validity of the SEL data that we can gather. And so those are elements that I've been thinking about.
Yeah, thank you, Mary. That's really appreciate sharing on both fronts. And on your first point, just to summarize your point about mutual language around mutual agreement, do you believe right now then that is what needs to be elevated or made more visible, so that in those beginning of the year conferences and planning conferences for the year between teacher and evaluator, teacher and principal, that it would be much more clear in policy or in guidance around mutual agreement? Is that part?
Yeah. Yes. I believe teachers really do need to understand that they can say that as a social studies teacher, as a gym teacher, having a literacy or numeracy goal, maybe that's one SLO, but the other SLO should really be a subject level or something that you really feel engaged with. And if another person wants that literacy or numeracy goal, that's great, but there should be a mutual agreement associated with it. And it is absolutely the case that SLOs across the state in many districts are dictated. This is what we're doing. This is the formula. And here is the topic. It's a problem.
Well, so allowing for maybe greater educator autonomy with selecting one that might be closer to their own content. That part of what you're, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and interesting you mentioned that. Just a quick aside, there are several states now that have added on to the SMART goal process by adding an IE. And I don't know if you heard about this, so it's like SMARTY now. So it's both inclusion and equity is added to the SMART frame. And that actually helps a little bit to your point about the educator thinking of how am I thinking about equity and how is my school thinking about equity in a way that perhaps was not as visible before by adding that IE. So, there are several states that have kind of transitioned the SMART goal process to adding that IE on the end, and they're seeing some pretty good results so far. Kate, so Kate Field, thank you for echoing Mary in the chat then too you want to, does that spark anything for you, Kate, when you said about the measures of accomplishment, when you heard that?
Yeah, I hadn't heard of that before, and I really like that idea, particularly as it relates to SEL. I think a lot of teachers have a very visceral reaction when people say SLO or they'll say a SMART goal. And I think that visceral reaction, which is a very powerfully negative one, is often because schools are dictating it, as Mary said, or because it's tied to a standardized measure that's not necessarily well matched or the teacher may perceive it as not particularly reliable, even though it gives you a percentage or it gives you a number. And I like the idea of measures of accomplishment because it kind of implies that there's multiple ways that a teacher is able to show that they're increasing their own knowledge and professional learning, but that's also translating to improve student performance. But that measure, you know, might be a holistic one, or it might be multiple measures that not necessarily smart in the sense that it's tied to a standardized test or an actual score on something, because it just seems very counterintuitive that we're going to come up with an SEL instrument, a standardized indicator of SEL growth. It seems, I mean, it kind of makes me laugh because it's no matter how valid, how many times it gets validated, no matter how reliable it claims to be, you're trying to put a number on something that's very, very human. And I think teachers are going to have a real hard time with that concept.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. And Elizabeth, thank you for your question about, is there a common understanding of what SEL is? And maybe that's a question to the department team. And I also know it's great food for thought going forward around maybe numerous terms to be more clearly defined if they're not already in the evaluation model, in terms of a glossary of, you know, terms like equity, SEL, culturally responsive teaching. A lot of those get used with varying levels of definition and understanding, right? So Elizabeth, thank you for the question. And maybe for the Chris and the team, is there right now in the current model, is there a definition of what SEL is, or a statewide model, or statewide definition, excuse me?
I was actually going to kick that to Sharon if she wanted to jump in. So I think Elizabeth, it's a great question. And like Kate, Mary, and a lot of you on the call know that it was something that we really grappled with in the fall when we were trying to push out resources to support SEL within the flexibilities. I think our colleagues across the department have done a tremendous amount of work in this area over the course of the year. And I think that one of the benefits is that we will be better positioned to support that and have more common language for districts coming into the spring and the summer in preparation for next fall. So I know Sharon's been working a little bit with our colleagues across the department on that as well.
Yeah, thanks for that, Chris. So one of the resources that we will be sending you after this meeting in preparation for our next meeting and the overall work moving forward will be an at-a-glance crosswalk, which will actually have two parts. And as Chris mentioned, we have been working very collaboratively with our colleagues in the Office of Student Support to see where each of our work can support the work of various projects. But the at-a-glance crosswalk will show the intersection of our current CCT rubrics, and one of them will crosswalk with the 5 social and emotional core competencies from CASEL. The other crosswalk will be between the CCT rubric and social and emotional teaching practices that have been identified through research from the great teachers and leaders. So this is definitely an overview and not meant to be all encompassing, but it will show where there are existing alignment to SEL practices and skills that already exist in our CCT rubrics, which many districts are using. So we wanted to try to highlight where there would be some familiarity for educators within our current resources.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you, Sharon. And Elizabeth, thank you for the question. I wanted to give you an opportunity to say a little bit more if you'd like, just in terms of your experience and what prompted the question. I think you're on mute, Elizabeth. Sorry. Yeah, there you go.
Can you hear me now?
There you go. That's good.
Okay.
Hi, yes, as this is a very interesting conversation, I guess I could relate to my own experiences on the Board of Education. We've, grappled with this issue, but I think there are secondary indicators that our school climate committees have developed in terms of whole school climate, how many kids are being sent to the office or how many kids are, acting out. I mean, those kinds of behaviors, which I know is, social emotional learning really needs to get deeper than the behavior. So what we've been doing as a school district, especially in the elementary levels, and for indicate, we've been having the circle times in the morning, and the teachers have really embraced it. Not all, but most of them. And we've seen an amazing difference in that practice in school climate, as far as students feeling welcome, students feeling that people can, that they can express their opinions. There's been a whole kind of, lessening of this, go to the office, behave, that kind of thing. So I think there's a direct correlation between professional development in these areas of SEL, as well as the school developing some indicators that they want to work on. So maybe a SMART goal could be in terms of the whole school climate, and individual teachers are trained and given the resources and support for these practices. So I think PD is directly related to evaluation, and we have to make that synergy very, very upfront, because it can't be in a vacuum. And I think we've had success in Waterbury through this model, and I think the teachers really feel that they are making a contribution.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for sharing that, and especially the whole school approach, as you mentioned, with SEL, and also the importance of kind of ongoing professional development or professional learning, right, to implement and to think about whether it's a whole school approach or whatever the focus and initiative is. Because I think we see this especially with high quality instructional materials and the importance of rigorous curriculum, but without the teacher training and teacher support to implement, that's often where it can fall down, right? And so that's, I think, another really important point. We just have a couple minutes left. I want to make sure if anyone else, before we kind of turn it over to Sharon for kind of the final piece, because I think you would appreciate this is really the beginning of the conversation around the flexibilities. And in a moment, we'll share kind of what the next steps are going to be. But wanted to give anyone else an opportunity either in the chat or to say something based on everything that's been shared so far and your thoughts.
I guess I would, I'm sorry, I don't mean to talk too much, but
Oh,
I
great.
guess I would, one of the programs that I was exposed to through Magnet Schools Assistance Program grant was called MTP. It's My Teaching Partner out of University of Virginia. And that is a coaching model, and it supports the development of coaches. But in that model is really, really explicit language around what creating great rapport looks like. And it's as simple as smiling. It's not, there's no interpretation, there's no subjectivity. It's just, did you see it or not? But what I loved about it is what they do with coaches is they train them to go after the strengths of the educator. And so you build confidence. And we talk about this with students, this strengths-based approach in our classrooms. But I think it's going to be really difficult if we don't start doing that same practice with educators, but yet we expect that in the classroom. So that's just a thumbnail of the conversation. But I just think that really teaching whether it's a coaching level or our principals about talking through a strength-based lens, I think it's a great model for what we want to see in the classroom.
Yeah, thank you, Kate. And that's a great reminder. We're partnering on that MTP model at Learning Forward. So I will send to Sharon, if it's okay, Sharon, to send out to everybody. We just had written a brief about just everything you just said, Kate, in terms of what those districts experience with a strengths-based approach. So these coaches, for example, are not even content-based. They're not even going in training to look at, math or ELA, but more about what is the teacher doing to promote positive student engagement in the classroom. as you mentioned, Kate. And so that's a great example, a great model, just as a resource to think about what that could look like when you're in this space that we're all thinking about, right, with ongoing feedback and support. And also that teachers feel like their strengths are being recognized, which many of the veteran teachers who are part of the model say that was just like a game changer, and they had a renewed energy to be back in, during COVID, when their leaders were recognizing the strengths that maybe they've never seen before, right? So yeah, so that's a good point. Thank you. Yeah, Jeff, thank you for sharing as well. If you wanted to mention that about the learning communities and the interaction with ratings, right? Yeah.
Yeah, we've been talking about how educators almost going to have to be first responders regarding health and emotional support and so forth. And we are going to have to truly make sure that students feel safe and comfortable as they come back to school. And that's going to be a learning experience for all of us, because it hasn't necessarily been something we've been talking about. And it may, for lack of a better term, overtake some of our other initiatives in school, at least for the next couple of years. This is not going to be a 1 year, possibly even a 2. I mean, this is going to be multiple conversations that we need to have and figure out how we're going to get from where we are. And I like Build Back Better too, as long as it's not build back the same as we were before before this pandemic hit. And that's going to be the challenge, I think we're going to have.
Yeah, thank you. And I really appreciate that term, healing community, because I think there's power in there that, as you noted, to recognize what are the needs of students that could be very different than when teachers last saw them 8, 10, or 12 months ago, right? And thinking about next year and all the ramifications. So thank you very much. Any other final thoughts? As I mentioned before, we'll turn it over to Sharon for this final piece. And again, this will continue. I just want to also really thank everyone, because this is, I think, one of the most critical and important areas when you think about investing in educators, right? Typically a district's financial picture is 85% are in personnel. So it's only right that this is around how to, accelerate and maximize the effectiveness and the support for 85% of a budget, to put it in financial terms, right? That's often fixed around personnel. So really, really critical with that. So thank you. It's the beginning of this conversation. And unless anyone else, any other team member wants to say anything, I think, Sharon, it would be over to you for these next steps.
Thank you, Paul. And thanks to Paul and everyone who shared comments regarding your thoughts about the flexibilities for next year. We hope that you will, between now and the next meeting on April 27th, share some ideas and even the 3 questions that Paul posed to us just a short while ago to your colleagues, discuss their feedback, and send that to us by to Kimberly Audette by Friday, April 23rd. Our plan is to have that ready to share with you, the collective feedback, at our April 27th meeting. And so following that meeting, and with support of the State Board of Education during their May meeting, with their approval, we will be in a position to communicate to districts the flexibilities that they will have available for the 2021-2022 school year, which will allow district PDEX to plan for next year before they finish the school year this year. As Kimberly mentioned, we hope that this will alleviate some anxiety that we've already heard from districts wondering what next year will be like. So we hope this will alleviate some anxiety, and that it will give districts an opportunity to continue with the evaluation and support system that they've been familiar with this year. So having said that, the flexibilities will be a bridge to the educator practice and support this council will focus on during phases 2 and 3 that Chris had mentioned of this work, as we work together to reimagine educator evaluation and support. I mentioned previously the at-a-glance crosswalk that you will receive in an email with other resources that will come from in an email from Kimberly. I also wanted to mention that we are working very collaboratively with our colleagues in the Office of Student Supports. They are working to do some alignment and crossworks for resources that they have. We're trying to see where that work can overlap with our work. I wanted to also mention that our colleagues in that office are working on finalizing the social, emotional, and intellectual habits for grades 4 through 12. We already have those finalized for pre-K through grade 6, but that will also be another resource that we can use as we reimagine educator evaluation and support. So in closing, we again appreciate very much all of your time in being here today. Thank you, Paul, for your facilitation and your input. We look forward from hearing back from each organization after you have the opportunity to discuss with your stakeholders their thoughts about what we should keep with the flexibilities, what we should perhaps take out, and what we should perhaps change. And just also remember that these resources will be posted on our webpage, which will be under the Talent Office webpage in the SDE. So again, thank you all. Our next meetings, as you see, are April 27th, and then we have 2 in May. Our focus for the April 27th meeting will be to finalize a recommendation that we can bring to our state board. So thank you, everyone. And Chris or Dr. Tucker or Paul, I didn't know if you had any closing comments as well.
Thank you so much, Sharon, and to the Talent Office team, to you and Kimberly. I just wanted to say thanks to our council for coming together this morning, for your thoughts, for your time to start thinking about how we wish to move forward on this very important topic. And we thank Paul for facilitating our session. We look forward to seeing everyone again on April 27th. And in the meantime, if you have any questions, do not hesitate contacting Dr. Kimberly Audette or Sharon Fuller. So thanks again for your time. We wish everyone a great weekend. Take care.